In a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and sprawling meadows, there lived a young woman named Clara. She was known for her kindness, her unassuming nature, and the small bookstore she ran at the heart of the town. But while others saw Clara as someone with everything in order, she carried a burden that few knew about. Behind her warm smile and the cheerful atmosphere of her bookstore, Clara struggled with feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. Clara had grown up in a family where success was expected, where excellence was not just encouraged but demanded. Her parents, both university professors, had always been people of high academic achievement. Her older brother, James, was a brilliant lawyer, and her younger sister, Emily, was a rising star in the medical field. Clara, however, had always felt like the odd one out. She didn't have the sharp wit or the commanding presence of her family members. What she had, though, was a quiet love for books and stories, which led her to open her bookstore, The Faded Page, a charming place filled with well-worn novels and the scent of old paper. The bookstore had been her dream, her way of carving a space for herself in a world that seemed to demand more than she could give. But lately, the weight of comparison was starting to wear on her. The bookstore, though loved by the locals, barely brought in enough income to cover the bills. There were days when Clara wondered if she had made a mistake. If she had been foolish to pursue a dream that seemed so far removed from the high expectations of her family. One particularly hard afternoon, Clara was sitting behind the counter, reading a letter she had received from her mother. It was an invitation to a family gathering at their house. Her heart sank as she read the lines. "We would love for you to come, but we can't help but wonder when you're going to take the next step in your career. What's next for you, Clara? We worry that you're not fulfilling your potential." Her mother's words echoed in her mind, the sense of disappointment cutting through her. She folded the letter slowly and placed it on the counter, fighting the tears that stung her eyes. Clara had never been one to cry in public, but the weight of feeling misunderstood and unseen was becoming too much to bear. The bell above the bookstore door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. Clara wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile, looking up to greet the customer who had entered. It was an elderly man, wearing a worn jacket and a wide-brimmed hat. He shuffled towards the shelves, scanning the rows of books with a thoughtful expression. Clara stood up and approached him. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice still carrying a hint of sadness. The man looked up at her, his eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. "I'm looking for something about courage," he said quietly. "Something that might remind me that there's strength in the most unexpected places." Clara blinked, taken aback by the request. She hadn't expected such a deep, personal inquiry from a stranger. She glanced around the shelves, trying to think of a suitable recommendation. She reached for a book she loved, a worn copy of The Hobbit, and handed it to the man. "This one," she said with a small smile. "It's a story about unlikely heroes, about finding courage in the face of uncertainty." The man accepted the book, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "Sometimes, all we need is a little reminder." As the man made his way to the counter to pay, Clara noticed that his hands trembled slightly, though his face remained serene. She couldn't help but wonder about the stories he carried within him. What had he been through? What had made him seek out courage in a bookstore? Of all places. After the man left, Clara sat down again, her mind racing. Courage. The word echoed in her thoughts like a quiet drumbeat. What did courage mean to her? Was it the courage to chase a dream, even when it felt impossible? Was it the courage to stand up to the weight of her family's expectations and follow her own path? No matter how uncertain or unglamorous. As the evening drew on, Clara decided to close up the shop early. She locked the door and sat at the small table in the corner, staring at the flickering candlelight. She was exhausted, but there was a strange sense of clarity that had settled in her heart. Maybe the courage she needed wasn't some grand, heroic gesture. Maybe it was the courage to keep going, to stay true to herself even when the road ahead was unclear. Over the next few weeks, Clara began to find small ways to reclaim her sense of purpose. She started hosting community events at the bookstore, book clubs, author readings, even a poetry night. Slowly but surely, people began to take notice. The bookstore was no longer just a place to buy books. It had become a gathering space, a place where people could connect over shared stories and experiences. The more Clara embraced the joy of bringing others together, the more she realized that her work was meaningful, even if it didn't fit the conventional measures of success. One evening, as Clara was closing up the store, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was the elderly man who had come in looking for courage. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said, his voice gentle, "and I wanted to thank you. That book you gave me, it reminded me of something I had forgotten. That courage doesn't always mean big acts of bravery. Sometimes, it's just the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time." Clara smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection. "I'm glad the book helped," she said, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The man nodded, his eyes sparkling. "You're a lot stronger than you realize," he said softly. "And this bookstore? It's more important than you know. People come here for more than just books. They come for the warmth, for the quiet strength that fills this space." Clara was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond, but the words touched something deep inside her. She had been so focused on what she lacked, on what she thought she was failing to do, that she hadn't seen the impact she was having on others. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to hear that." The man smiled and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You're welcome," he said. "And remember, sometimes the most important work is the work that others never see." After he left, Clara stood in the stillness of the shop, her heart full. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer felt the need to measure herself against anyone else. She wasn't her family's definition of success. She wasn't a lawyer or a doctor or an academic. But she was something far more important. She was herself. The days that followed brought new challenges. Of course, there were still bills to pay. And there were still moments when Clara questioned whether she was truly cut out for the life she had chosen. But she began to see her role in the town differently. She was no longer just a bookseller. She was a creator of spaces, a connector of people, a keeper of stories. It wasn't long before her bookstore became a symbol of something greater. A reminder that strength could be found in the most unexpected places. And that courage wasn't about having all the answers. It was about having the strength to keep going, to keep showing up, even when the future seemed uncertain. Clara's story is one of quiet resilience. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply show up and keep going. Day by day, in the face of doubt, in the face of expectations, she chose to walk her own path. And in doing so, she found a courage that was stronger than any measure of success. It was a courage rooted in staying true to herself, in creating something that mattered, and in believing that even the smallest actions could have a profound impact on the world around. her. And so, Clara's story continued, not with grand triumphs or dramatic changes, but with the steady, unwavering belief that her quiet strength was enough. The strength to continue, to hope, and to create something meaningful, one book at a time.